I am stumbling towards financial destruction. I've had vehicle problems, but since my vehicle is my home, I've teetered on the edge of homelessness. Unsure of what to do next, sometimes I look towards the future and feel overwhelmed with dread and despair. Myself and anyone who isn't sure what they should do next can expect to find themselves in a dark depression. It is here at the bottom of this darkness that I have found a bubbling spring of undying confidence. And now we are in a predicament. There's a predicament that I have found, that I've realized recently because of a thought that I had when I was a child. And I was playing in the backyard with my friends. Our parents were back there as well. There were adults back there. And I had a thought. I was like, I've got to go to school tomorrow. And this thought of having to go to school tomorrow came up often because I couldn't stand school. I couldn't stand walking in straight lines, despite the fact that because of my last name, I was towards the front of the line. The teacher was talking all day, but I didn't feel like I was learning anything. And I just had to spend hours and hours, like 8 hours a day. And most of the time I was watching the clock tick. And so on Sundays especially, I would look forward to the coming Monday with absolute dread. So on this particular day, when the thought came into my mind, that was a realization that I had to go to school in the morning. Out of curiosity, I was like, all right, I'm going to remember this thought. And if there's ever a time in my life, because right now it doesn't feel, at that point in my life, it didn't feel like there would ever be anything different that I did. All that I'd ever remembered was elementary school, and time had been moving slow, and time flies when you're having fun, but I certainly wasn't having fun. And because that had been a massive percentage of my life up to that point, I wasn't sure if my life would consist of anything else. I thought I might just be a child who's going to elementary school forever. And so I held this thought in my mind, and I was like, I'm going to remember the fact that I had this thought in this moment, because I'm curious if I ever am in a different place in my life where I'm not going to school anymore, then I'm going to remember this thought, and I'll know for a fact that everything is temporary. Life isn't like a dream where when you fall asleep, you're thrusted into a given experience and it kind of just feels like you've always been there. But there's not necessarily a linear nature to dreams. You can be anywhere doing anything with people you know or don't know. But this thought that I had when I was a child, I was like, if I'm ever anywhere else, I'm going to know that life isn't like a dream. There's a linear nature to time. And if this stage of my life, this going to class elementary school, is temporary, then I'll use this as a reference point, and I'll know that every other aspect of my life in the future will also be temporary. But time started to speed up, and I didn't remember that thought because I was in middle school and I was still doing similar things. I was still going to school at the same time. Whereas before I was playing sports in the backyard with my friends, I was playing football, I was playing wiffle ball. Now I was still playing football and wiffle ball, only now I had pads. And when I played baseball, there was umpires, there was referees, there were more rules. We were on a bigger field. There were teams from different cities. So similar things were happening, but it was on a more grand scale. So time just kept moving forward. And it was moving forward, and I was in slightly different places, but because it was all synonymous, it seemed like it wasn't too much different. So I kind of forgot about that thought. But I remembered it when I was in college. I was in college and I had been playing football. So I'd been playing football pretty much my whole life up to this point, and then all of a sudden I stopped playing football, still in college. And that had been at the root of my identity. And in that moment, I remembered that thought I had as a child, and I was certain that things are temporary. There was no ambiguity behind it anymore. Things are temporary. And then I was graduating from university, and I was graduating from university, and I quickly had to get a job. But before I graduated from university, I had another sort of epiphany, which was when you're young, you think there's something called adults. And there are adults. There's people who are older than you, of course, but you look at adults, your parents, and anyone else, and you assume that there's people in this world who are completely wise. They know what's going on in this world. They've got a full, coherent, articulate worldview, and they just know right and wrong. They know what is good. They know the proper way to live life. But then you reach that place where you become an adult, but you don't go through a portal. It's not like you are a child one day, you go through a portal and it's like, oh, I'm an adult now. You just go through these gradual changes, and then all of a sudden you are what you used to refer to as an adult. And part of that epiphany breeds fear, because you realize you've got to fully take care of yourself. You're responsible for yourself, and you thought maybe you would experience some sort of tangible change. You would be a different entity. You would have a knowledge, not only a deeper knowledge of life and reality, but you would have a full knowledge of reality. But that's not the case, and so the fear that comes with it is the fear of fitting into the world. And you've got to support yourself financially. So for me, I got a job right away. And a fear started to arise, which is you don't want to starve. You don't want to not have shelter. You don't want to undergo financial destruction. And you don't want to deal with anything subordinate to that as well. You don't want to be a person who's undergone financial destruction and then have people who are your friends, people in your life, judge you and be like a social pariah, outcasted from society. Because all of those things are in the same realm of death. Those are like different forms of dying. So you have a fear, and that is part of the motivation to get a job. And so the predicament that I'm referring to is that we engage in a transaction that is time for money. We take the time that we have and we're like, well, I'm going to give you, this corporation, company, individual, some of my time, and you're going to give me money. And then that's going to make me safe. I won't starve. The assumption is that this is going to continue. So I won't starve in the future. I'll continue to have shelter in the future. And I do believe this is the case for everybody as well. But as you make that transition from being a child, regardless of what kind of childhood you have, no child could support themselves financially. And so everybody was dependent on adults at some point of their life. Everybody was cared for to some extent. But now you've got to care for yourself. You've got to completely take care of yourself. But I believe everybody makes maybe a subtle covenant, agreement, contract, maybe even just implicitly. in the back of their mind, and they're like, well, I'm going to come back to the aspirations I had when I was a child. Because part of the other thought that I had when I was playing with my friends that evening was, it was a desire to not go to school the next day, yes, but it was also a desire to be free. But I had aspirations of things that I wanted to do with that freedom. I had a vision for my life, vague, very, very vague and abstract vision, but it was just an ideal of who I could be, the journeys that I could embark upon, the good that I could bring into the world, the man that I could become. And the job that I took to completely support myself financially wasn't aligned with that dream whatsoever. It was just a means to an end, which was to make money financially. And so I had an agreement in the back of my mind, like, I'm going to come back to these visions that I had for myself when I was a child. I'm going to, for me, I'd begun writing several years prior, so it's like, I'm going to write every day. And this job is going to be a means to make money, but once I have enough money, I'm going to fully give myself to the life that I know that I should live. And I truly believe it might be buried deep down, but I believe everybody has those imaginations for themselves, those visions for themselves, and time moves forward and you bury them deep, deep, deep. But I believe that they do exist. And so a fascinating thing begins to happen, though, which is as you work for someone else, a company, I think the time that we are spending, we're giving up so much of our time, a massive chunk of our time, but we're not doing it on the sidelines. Life is actively passing us by, and there's a certain pain from life passing you by while you're actively giving up all of your time. And I think, I believe it creates an emptiness within people. And it created an emptiness within myself. But the point that I'm making is that what happens with that emptiness is that you're working so hard and you're doing so much, and you want to see the fruits of your labor. You want to be rewarded for the time that you're spending. And so a bizarre but fascinating thing happens with a staggering percentage of individuals where you want to see fruits of your labor. And so you're like, well, I've been working really hard. I want a new flat screen TV. I mean, like, I deserve a new flat screen TV. I deserve a nice car. I've worked so hard today, so now after work I'm going to go to a restaurant and I'm going to have a nice meal, and I might even have a few drinks because I deserve all of this. I deserve these fruits of my labor, and we're justifying it by saying we deserve it. But I think it flows from that feeling of emptiness, of not practicing freedom of time. We know that there was a way that there was a vision that we had for ourselves of who we could become, the journeys that we could embark upon. And it wasn't just a childhood wish. I think that existed in us from the time that we were children, because that is a very sobering point of life. Children are very clear-minded. And I think it was true. I think those visions were true. And so because they're on the back burner at that point, that's where the emptiness comes from. And so then we become embattled. We become embattled because we want to create things. We want to write great stories. We want to paint great paintings. We want to create beautiful music. We want to build furniture out of wood. We want to do something that would be not only of benefit to the world and that other people could appreciate, something that came from our own labor and our own hands, but something that we believe in and something that would be fulfilling for ourselves, but we're not getting it because we took on a job that was meant to help us survive, that was oriented towards self-preservation, and it started off as a means to an end of self-preservation. But because we're empty, we want to see fruits for our labor, and maybe we can afford them or not, but the fascinating thing that I'm referring to is that so many people, whether you make $50 million or $50,000, live at or above their means. We live at or above our means. And so whereas we made this covenant with ourselves when we began doing the work, and again, for me, it was writing. And so I made a commitment, like I was going to write every morning while I was working. And I did write every morning while I was working, but I'm giving 10, 11, 12 hours to my job, and I'm giving 1 hour in the morning to writing. There's a massive disparity of time. So you're empty and you want to see fruits of your labor. Maybe you can't afford it, so you go into debt for that flat screen TV. You go into debt for that new vehicle. You go into debt even for the nice meals and the drinks after work. So now not only are you betraying that agreement because you're not working towards getting your time back. That's what you were working for at the beginning, earning your time back so that you could pursue the life that you're meant to live. But you actually owe time. You somehow owe time that hasn't even touched the present yet because you're in debt. And so many people, I think, degrade others for going down that pathway and living that lifestyle while everyone is doing it. Such a high percentage, so many people are doing it. And I try to paint the picture in the way that I've just painted it because it's actually not that crazy of a thing to do. You can understand why somebody would incidentally go down that path. And so we become embattled. We become embattled with this duality of, on one side, I need to survive. I need self-preservation. I don't want to starve. I don't want to be homeless. I don't want to be a social pariah. I don't want anything that comes with not being successful. And on the other side, you've got time actively moving forward. You've got a conscious or subconscious understanding of the brevity of life, how short life is, the fleeting nature of time. And those two things tear you apart. And this side causes the empty feeling that makes you go into debt to try to fill that empty feeling with material objects. And I can understand why people do it, and I can understand why I did it as well. So it's not exactly clear what somebody should do in that situation. And I think most of the time what happens is you've had that epiphany that you know that there aren't really adults in this world. You didn't go through a portal and just become a new being who has all of his things together, has his life together, and can do everything like a superhero. So you become fearful and you're like, well, you probably even understand this side of the brevity of life and the person that you should become and the best version of yourself, the life that you should live. But the crazy thing is that in order to live the life that you were meant to live and bring forth the vision that you had when you were a child, you have to be alive. So you have to survive and you have to engage in some sort of self-preservation. And I think a common thing that occurs is because of that fear, a different commitment is made. And it's so prevalent, and I will also say that, in my opinion, it's pretty disgusting. It's annoying. It's boring. People who are like determined for financial thriving, like they're single-minded, single-eye focused on financial thriving, and they've made a commitment, and they're angry all the time, and they're like, well, I'm going to be successful. I'm going to be successful. And so what happens is you're like, well, I'm an accountant, I'm a financial advisor. And then you start to get mixed into a formula, and the formula is activity/action plus time equals identity. So you're an accountant, you're a financial advisor. You might have even had your picture on a billboard. You've got your face on a billboard. That felt good. And you're like, okay, well, this is good. I'm going far away from the financial destruction and death that I was afraid of. This is a good identity. Activity plus time equals identity. So consciously or subconsciously, you're like, well, I'm a financial advisor. I am a financial advisor. I am an accountant. And you go out and you get drinks with the other financial advisors, and you start to consume the things that they consume, and you start to use the lexicon that they use, the vernacular. You speak in the same way that they speak. They might be doing drugs. They might be consuming a bunch of alcohol, but that's all okay because that's the food of your people. That's the food of who you are. And so you adopt the entirety of the lifestyle. You wake up in the morning, you see yourself as a financial advisor, an accountant, a politician. You feel like that. You feel like you are that. You do the things that they would do. But something is missing. Something is missing. And I realized this when I was working my previous job, and it was as a mortgage loan advisor. And so what I did is I quit. And I only quit one time, but what I'm referring to is that I would quit the identity all of the time. My colleagues would make me angry and fed up. My leaders within the company would make me angry and fed up. And the weekend would come, and I'd be in a state of dread and despair, a different sort of dread and despair, the despair of losing my time. And I would be like, well, I quit. I'm not a mortgage loan advisor. At the core, the essence of my soul isn't a mortgage loan advisor. So I'm going to shred off this identity. So I would keep going to work, and I would keep doing the things that I was responsible for doing, but I wouldn't attach my identity to it. I wouldn't see myself as that individual. I would bring it back to a means to an end. It was a means to make money so that I could get to the point where I pursued what I believed to be my life's aspiration. And so I would quit all of the time. I would always quit the identity. And from that, new kind of fear left me. A fear that that inadvertently built up left me, which was the fear of like death. Because I didn't want to get fired. I didn't want to get in trouble because I didn't want to lose the identity. I didn't know I didn't want to lose the identity. I didn't know that was what I was afraid of. I didn't know that I was afraid of losing that the image of success that came with being who I was relative to my peers and even my family and friends. But then I would quit the identity. I would quit seeing myself in that direction, and I would be like, well, this isn't who I am. This isn't the essence of my soul. And so when I let go of the identity, then I was kind of nothing for a moment. But then I would ask myself a question. And I've always thought why questions are the most powerful. in regards to open-ended questions, why, what, when, how, why is the most powerful question. But in those moments, I realized that who is actually the most powerful question, meaning who am I? And whereas I'd been feeling bad, feeling horrible, and honestly had disdain and resentment within my heart, I would try to reconnect with God. And I'd be like, well, I'm actually a child of God. I'm a child of God. I'm not at the core of everything that I am. I'm not a mortgage loan advisor. I'm not a financial advisor. I'm not, when I played football, I'm not a football player at university. I'm not a university student. These are just the things that I'm doing, but they're not the core of who I am. And that always worked. The quitting of my identity always worked. But it got to a point where if I was serious about the thing that I was trying to do, which is be a child of God, I have to listen to the direction that God calls me. And then it got to a point where I wanted to get that time back, and I was still afraid of the financial destruction that would come with not having immediate income. But I was like, time is leaving me too quickly. I'm getting too old too rapidly. And it's going to reach a point where those visions and those imaginations and those aspirations I had when I was a child are buried too deep and I can't get them back. And I was like, my relationship with pursuing the highest good and genuinely striving and trying to be a child of God is more important than my worldly survival. I was like, yeah, I need my survival. I need my life to write and to do the things that I want to do. But if I have to weigh the two, I'd rather just take the risk of pursuing my life's aspiration, trying to become the best version of myself, trying to live the life that I know that I should live, and let everything else take care of itself without fear involved. And especially when I took that jump, that was a horrifying endeavor. And one of the things that convinced me to take that path, and it was always convincing me to stumble towards that path, was a verse in the Bible where Jesus Christ is giving a Sermon on the Mount, and he says, pursue first the kingdom of God, and everything else will be given to you. Pursue first the kingdom of God, and everything else will be given to you. And I wasn't really sure what that meant, because I can say that right now, and he could say that in the Bible, and people can reiterate that verbiage, but it's a lot easier to state the words than to actually do the thing, because I'm like, yeah, I can say it and it's interesting in theory, but it's like, I still need to work a job so that I can make money. But it reached a point where I was like, I've got to pursue the life that I'm meant to live. I've got to actually become a child of God. I've got to not fear. I've got to be willing to sacrifice my own life. I've got to put everything, and you've got to sacrifice your own life, because again, on this side is survival and self-preservation, but on this side is the wisdom that comes with the brevity of life. And so often they're in opposition, and I was like, I don't think I can actually do both. I thought at one point that maybe I could kind of do both and I could balance them, but the self-preservation and the survival and the striving for finances, whereas before it was I was saying that it was a means to an end, but it had become a means in itself. And I was identifying with the success that I was achieving too much, and it was painful for my soul. So it's like, all right, if I have to weigh these two things, and if only one of them can survive, if only one of these endeavors can survive, then I'm going to give my life to God. And people could look at my life right now and they could be like, well, that's not what you're doing. You're just chilling. You're just doing what you want. But that's why I stated at the beginning that I am going towards financial destruction. I have teetered on the edge of homelessness, but there aren't other options. And those guys that I'm referring to, these individuals who you see on the internet and modern day gurus who try to sell themselves and who try to sell you on a way that you should live your life and how you can become financially secure and XYZ. It's like, I don't want any of that. I don't want to deal with any of that. I don't want that to be my life's pursuit, because at the end of the day, I care about that, but I only care about that to the extent that it was helping me pursue my life's aspiration, bringing me closer to God. And if it's not bringing me closer to God, I've got to do something else. So for me, success, worldly success, financial success stopped being a means to that end, but it became an end to itself. And it couldn't continue. A change had to happen. A bold change had to happen. And it is at the bottom, the darkness, when you aren't sure what you should do next, and the future is completely uncertain, and you are in terrifying chaos, that you run out of options and you have nowhere else to look except God. And when that happens, you have an opportunity to do what I'd been continuously doing when I was working for my company, which was shed off my identity, shred the veil that was over my eyes, how I was seeing the world, and see the world in a new way. And I wouldn't say try to figure out who I am, but rather it's more like a remembrance, like just remember who I am, which this may not be a perfect articulation, but it's where I'm at right now. I would say a child of God. And it is there where I have found my identity as a child of God, that I have found unwavering confidence, because if you truly come to know God, if you truly come to know the highest good, if you get close and intimate with what you might call the ultimate reality, living fully in the present moment, then you don't have envy anymore for other people's life, because you realize that everybody has their own specific purpose. And I'm pursuing my purpose. And it is in this identity as a child of God that I realized from coming to know God, not that I believed, but I came to know truly that if God is for you, who could be against you?